All right, everyone, welcome back. I think we will get started. So just to share a brief bio here. So again, Miles was unable to join us in person today, but did graciously send a video presentation for us to view. So Miles Richardson is a citizen of the Haida Nation, where he served as president of the council from 1984 until 1996. Miles is one of the original members of the David Suzuki Foundation and has been a board member with that group since 1992. In 2007, Miles was named an officer of the Order of Canada, and currently he is director of the National Consortium for Indigenous Economic Development at the University of Victoria. And we will play his video now.
Singe la, good day. I am Kilslai Kajisting. I'm from the Eagles of Chath of the Haida Nation. I am Miles Richardson. I'm pleased to join you this morning at the invitation of the Healthy Communities Partnership to talk about collaborative action on climate change. The topic of this panel today is moving forward together while integrating Indigenous traditional knowledge into our practices. That's a really big and important topic, and I want to talk a little bit about some of my experiences around that and how that has happened in my practices. You know, when I look out across Canada today, I see two world views struggling for dominance, struggling for power over each place. There's the ancient Indigenous paradigm, the ancient worldview of each nation in their own territory that's struggling to survive, to prosper, as each of us has for millennia. Many societies across this land that have met challenges similar to what we're facing today with the climate challenge, with global warming, and with biodiversity loss. Our societies, our nations, I'll refer to them, are here today celebrating our continuous survival because we have met all of these challenges in the past. Our ancient nations are struggling with what I'll call a colonial paradigm, a way of knowing that defines so-called Western civilization, which is a relatively new way of knowing, which is a relatively new way of organizing our practices as peoples and as nations. And it's based on science. It's based on science, which is a good thing. But science is a very limited, a very focused worldview. And in and of itself, it's not finding the solutions to these big issues. It's letting values and principles that aren't in accordance with the truth as Indigenous people know them. It's letting those values and principles take over and bring us off on the wrong track. When Indigenous people talk about sustainability and the need to think of the 7 generations out when we're considering our actions today, mainly to think about the future and the well-being of future generations and ensuring that they enjoy the prosperity and the abundance that we enjoy today. That's the challenge of sustainability. That's fighting with the other paradigm, which values, above all else, economic growth, which is a wrong assumption. To think that we could have growth, economic growth, continually, exponentially growing forever is like a bad disease in a Indigenous way of knowing. And it's those type of values and principles that are guiding Western civilization. So Do we have to have a battle over which one of these ways of knowing ought to prevail or which one we should adopt? I'm here to say that we need both of them. We need both ways of knowing, and we as the human species here in this place called Canada, but around this globe, must figure out how to reconcile and build guidance into our daily living, our daily practices, these two ways of knowing. Indigenous people, my people, have been on this earth since our creation. Every one of our indigenous nations has our own creation story. Suffice it to know, our people know we've been in our homelands, Haida Gwaii, since our creation as humans on this earth. After 15,000 plus years of our people thriving in our homelands, we must have been doing something right. It can't be an accident. And you look at every other nation across this country, you look at the Ktunaxa, you look at the Nuu-chah-nulth, the Cree, the Micmacs. Same story, in their own way, in their own place. They've endured, they've survived to this point in time. So why was that? I believe that one reason, and I've seen this right across Turtle Island, one thing that Indigenous people share, we have in common in our practices, is we begin with proper ceremony. Proper ceremony as each of us understands it. As our cultures, from living in one place, watching the sunrise and the sunset from the same place through great expanses of time, have reduced knowledge to wisdom, to ways of being, to ways of living, to the practices that guide our life. And one elder at Turtle Lodge reminded me and made a powerful statement that I won't forget when we were talking about ceremony and what is ceremony. I remember he started up, he said to me, "Miles, you're a politician. In politics, it's us and them, me and you, win or lose." Said spirituality, which is the purpose of proper ceremony, is simply reminding ourselves that we're all in this together. We're all in this together. We are one with the rest of creation. We are one with the rest of humanity. And to find our way forward, we must build that understanding into how we live our lives, into our practices. And to me, as best as I can understand these things, that is one fundamental reason that Indigenous people have been able to endure and thrive through these millennia. The last 200 or 300 years have been a dark period, but they don't define our existence as a people. Our nations have been amongst the most accomplished nations throughout the history of humankind on this earth. And we will get there again, but we need to understand these basic beliefs, these basic ways that define who we are. It all begins with that commitment to proper ceremony, that reminding ourselves and basing our practices on we're all in this together, and accepting that we are all one. So I came along in the early 80s as a young Haida leader at a time when Haida Gwaii was on the verge of just being stripped bare of all the natural gifts and wonder of that place by a voracious, hungry, industrial state. And our people were not even listened to, were relegated to the margins through the colonial system. And they were threatening at this time in the mid-80s to cut the last tree on our island. They were clear cutting. It was, as Jimmy Gosnell, the great Nisga'a leader, put it, leaving behind a tree of rotten stumps. And as they took the forest, they stripped the habitat for our fisheries, for our salmon resources, all their spawning grounds, all their habitat, so there were no more salmon. And the foreshore, they were taking all the rich marine life. And our elders sat us down, and I remember this really clearly. And they talked to us about a Haida way of knowing, which I grew up in the midst of, but you know, my world was very much in the modern Canadian world of the political power struggle. And our elders, to put it simply, said to us, banging on the white man's door and asking for justice, even though they promised it, even though it's consistent with who they say they are, is not working. If we keep doing that as our main strategy, we may not survive as a people. And every generation of our nation before us has met that basic test of survival, passing on our cultural inheritance to the next generation. Our elders said if they drill for oil and gas now in our waters, that might be the death knell for our people on our islands. We have to do something, they told us. And what we have to do, they said, is to protect our life source. That's why we're here. That's what makes us Haida. That's what makes us our relationship to our place, is accepting on our shoulder the responsibility for the well-being of the place our Creator put us on this earth. We must protect her. That became our mandate. Our people, in their hearts, knew that that was absolutely the truth and what we had to do. So we set up our own modern government as a Haida nation. Before we had an oral tradition which worked throughout history. Was a strict oral tradition that in today's world, if we're going to work with others, if we're going to get along with others and still be true to who we are, we needed to write out our governance process, and so we wrote a constitution and a process for making and implementing Haida laws. So we started, as well as putting together our government and our constitution, we did a new land and marine use plan for Haida Gwaii. It was very rudimentary, just to the fundamentals. I used to refer to it as the 6-point plan. There were 14 key areas on our islands that had not yet been logged. Pretty large contiguous areas in their natural state from mountaintop to mountaintop in the watersheds. So we designated Naikun was already a BC provincial park, beautiful part of our islands. That was protected, that was fine. So we designated it was going to be protected forever. Guayanas, southern part of our island. Environmentalists had identified it, and Haidas had identified it, and in the face of the logging industry said this area is so important it must be protected. On and on. There were 14 of those areas that we unilaterally, under Haida authority, designated under Haida law to be protected in their natural state. And we didn't put out a offer to negotiate or anything. We just said, we're the sovereign of Haida Gwaii. We've always been. That has never changed. This is our law. This is the way it will be. Any of you want to work with us to protect these areas and implement the values that we've designated will prevail in these 6 zones, we'll work with you. So what we did is we didn't have an army, we didn't have a lot of money to mount a fancy defense of these areas, but we had one thing then, we had a culture, and we knew with absolute conviction that we were right. And it took all of our people to do this. So in protecting this area, our strategy was very simple. We went out to the logging camp, which was on the verge of going into Goose Tribal Park, which we just designated as protected. We set up feast tables down the middle of the logging road outside their camp on a Saturday afternoon. We brought in on seine boats, on fishing boats, a beautiful feast that was cooked in the communities. And we brought it out there and we drummed and sang the appropriate songs. We did the proper ceremonies and we invited the loggers to come and feast with us because we had something important to tell them. We didn't know if they were going to come or not. Everybody in that camp showed up. The workers, their bosses, their families, they all came and feasted with us in the middle of the road outside their camp. And those people, to this day, so when we did the feast, we explained to them, this is Haida land. We're concerned about the future because we need to preserve some areas from logging, and we have made a decision that this area will not be logged. It'll remain in its natural state in perpetuity. Those people honored the Haida decision. So move on to the next area. In 1984, the next of the 14 areas that came up was Guayahanas. And I know that the forest industry in British Columbia and Canada was pulling their hair out by then, saying, we can't let these Haidas get away with this. We can't just let them take over their island again, so they had to fight. So we fought. Our people stood up with the best way we could, non-violently, but determinedly, stood between the logging equipment and the forests, the intact forests in Guayahanas. They took us to court. We defended ourselves in court. And, again, our elders directed us, we're not sending lawyers into those courts. We'll speak, this issue is so important, they said. We'll speak for ourselves. We'll stand up in front of those people and we'll tell them why we're doing what we're doing. And that's exactly what we did. I was the elected president of the nation. So instead of a lawyer, I went into court with my regalia on, my button blanket, and explained to the judge and to the court respectfully, with all our elders and our chiefs in the room, why we were doing what we were doing. And it just went on, and they dragged us through the court system, and they kept trying to log. They were approaching the area where we drew the line. And so we had our blockade set up. We had support from around the world. It was amazing. People came to support us. And then something happened that really showed me the power of ceremony. So this is getting really stressful. Our people are standing on the line. Almost 100 had got arrested. As a young leader, I was worried that our people weren't going to give in. They were not going to let this area be logged. I was worried that people were going to die, that people was going to get into a confrontation so serious that people would die. That was my fear anyway. And so when they kept pushing us where we're on the line, we thought we got to move forward to where they're going to go next. They were going to go to a pristine watershed because they have their logging plans all laid out and scheduled, so we know what they are. And you know, it wasn't totally negative but once that system gets, you know, you get the police and the politicians who are all posturing, it gets very dangerous. But, you know, there was a sense of, you know, the loggers weren't entirely the enemy. When it was clear we were going to blockade, the boss of the company, his name was he was a good man, a man I considered my friend, Frank Bevan. When he understood that we were going to blockade to stop him from logging, he also owned a helicopter company. One morning, just before we headed down to the blockades, he arrived on the beach in front of Chief Skiddigat's house. 8 in the morning, the chief calls me to come down to his house for a cup of coffee. So I went down and had a coffee with Frank Bevan, the owner of the logging company, and Chief Skiddigat. And all Frank Bevan came to say is, how did he put it? He said, I respect you people. If this was my island, I'd be doing the same thing. He said, but I gotta do what I gotta do, he said. And he said, I'm here this morning simply to say, when this is all over, I hope we can sit down and have a cup of coffee again. So there was this, you know, it wasn't total, but it was two systems coming into clash. And we the humans were, you know, I think, trying to make it work. There were assholes around the edges and you know, and threats from loggers and stuff, but it was nothing like we had a sense of being together. Anyway, the story I was getting to was, so we moved our line to the next watershed, and we put up a Haida house in this watershed, and I mean, and something happened there that changed the whole future, in my view. While we're building the house and getting ready to open it with a potlatch and name it, while the house is going up, 2 Cree emissaries, spiritual leaders, show up on the ferry from the mainland. They claim they came to the islands before and never connected with anybody, so they came back. So we invited them down to where we were building our house. And, you know, they connected with some of our elders. And they said, we are messengers from the Hopi Nation. We had ceremonies with the Hopis before, and we'd known each other. And the Hopis had seen, probably on the news and stuff, what the hardships we were going through in protecting our islands. So these 2 emissaries brought a set of crystals, and they had directional instructions to bury these crystals in the lands that we were fighting to protect, they said. And they said, when you do this with your ceremony, you're going to connect Haida ceremony with Hopi ceremonies, and we're going to double the effect. And they said further to that, our ceremonies have told us that you have to hold this line. You have to stop this destruction. This is what the emissaries relayed to us. That if you stop the logging here, those dark forces are going to rebound back on themselves and gobble themselves up. If you don't stop those forces here, it's all over for us as humans. That was their message. And our elders went out with them into the watershed, buried those crystals according to those instructions, and really stretched to remember our Haida ceremonies, how to practice our spirituality. And that became a part of everything we did. And I'll tell you, from that time on, everything became easy. I was under tremendous stress as a leader, you never have full information, not knowing what the other side's gonna do. But after those ceremonies, and when we started building that house in Windy Bay, the province was threatening to meet us on the beach and battle us. This was the government in Victoria. The Deputy Minister of Land said, "That is not Haida land, that's province land. If you think you're going to put a house on that area, we'll be there to stop you." We told them we're going to be there at high tide on Monday morning. See you there. Of course, they never showed up. With that was a major threat, though. And when we finished putting up that house about a month later, we had done the ceremonies with joining the Haida ceremonies with the Hopi, and our chiefs named the house and potlatched it. Canada's RCMP were there in their ceremonial regalia potlatching with us. They were there in their red serge. That's one of the most hopeful moments I've had. But I'll tell you, after that, everything became quite easy. And I mean, the story doesn't unfold this easy, and there was still a bit of tension and a lot of action required. But in 2010, this was in 1985. In 2010, the Haida Nation signed an agreement with the province of British Columbia, a joint decision-making protocol, which was an interim step. It wasn't about resolving the title question, but it was about decision-making over these lands that we had two different ways of governing over. And BC and the Haida Nation agreed that not 1 square inch of Haida Gwaii that was provincial crown would be zoned or any uses put to it without agreement of both sides. So essentially, the Haida Nation has to approve anything that's done on Haida Gwaii on provincial crown, and the rest of the island is Guayanas, which is federal crown, which we have a similar joint decision-making protocol with them. So, as President of the Haida Nation Gujau said in those days, we no longer have anything to fight over. We got to just work together and do our best to, management and stewarding territory is tough at the best of times, and even working together, it's tough, but we're putting our effort in now into doing that constructively, and it's just, I know it can be done. We've shown it can be done, but each of us have to have the courage to be who we know we are, to understand what our responsibilities are, what our values are that make us who we are, and we've got to live them. And that's for Indigenous people, that's for all people. And we'll get there. A related important initiative that I want to bring your attention, something that I'm involved in as chair, is a dialogue that we've initiated in Canada, a national dialogue called Reconciling Ways of Knowing. We're working with a group of really committed and concerned and talented people across this country to conduct a dialogue between these two ways of knowing and appealing to the policymakers, to people in how we each live our lives, to familiarize yourself with both ways of knowing as we plan our way forward. If any of you get an opportunity, look at Reconciling Ways of Knowing dialogue, and you can tune in through our website, www.waysofknowingforum.ca. Thank you for your attention and for participating in this important dialogue. Hawa.
All right. Unfortunately, we won't be able to thank Miles directly in person, but I know Diane has offered to give those words of thanks on behalf of all the participants. So thank you, Diane, for not only coordinating bringing Miles to us today, but for providing thanks as well.